Entrepreneurship is not only critical for wealth and job creation, it is the key ingredient in creating resilient and prosperous communities and economies. But in most African countries, 80% of businesses fail within their first 5 years of operation, and only 4% survive beyond 10 years. What does it take to make the cut and succeed? But most importantly, what are the fatal mistakes that entrepreneurs make on the continent? Welcome to our powerful masterclass series. Join successful serial entrepreneurs Gilbert Manirakiza and Dr. Funso Somorin as they uncover never-heard-before secrets and stories of failure and success. They will be joined by some of the most successful business minds from across the continent.
Everyone, welcome. I'm very humbled that you all decided to grace us with your time and your presence at such short notice. We started talking about this with you, or announcing this with you, probably a few days back, not more than 3-4 days ago, and you are all here. So we're very excited to have you here. So allow me to just dive in and say how excited I am to be here with my brother and friend, Funso, Dr. Somorin. And we are here to talk about something very interesting, something that is very close to our hearts, and that is specifically entrepreneurship. We are both entrepreneurs, and we have many experiences that we have gone through, that we have lived through, specifically as African entrepreneurs. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Gilbert Manirakiza. I am the founder and CEO of the Newmark Group, co-founder and CEO of the Newmark Group. We are celebrating 10 years, very proud of the team that we have, very proud of the work that we have done over the years. In fact, sometimes when I look at what we have been able to achieve as an African company, it really feels surreal. We've gotten to work with Fortune 500 companies doing fantastic things here in Africa. We've also worked with African companies that are aspiring to scale and that are also doing phenomenal things on this continent. And I'm also the co-founder of Weza ProSoft, a very dynamic tech startup. Well, we've been around for about 3 years, so maybe not such a young startup. However, we are learning a lot in the technology space, working with fantastic companies, developing great software. These are the two companies that I am mostly associated with at this point. However, over the years, I have tried to set up several other businesses and companies. Some of them have not been so lucky as these two that I've just mentioned. So all the lessons coming out of this are an inspiration to come to you here today and try to share some of the notions, insights, concepts that an entrepreneur might actually need to keep in mind when they are doing business here in Africa. I would like to stop there and hand over to my good brother Funso so that he can also give you some context as well and introduce himself.
Thank you, Gilbert. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Thanks for joining us. Again, let me say this, I'm extremely excited to be part of this project. It's a very timely conversation on the topic of entrepreneurship in Africa. So I'm gonna just save the rest of the conversation later, but let me introduce myself. My name is Funso Somorin. I put on many hats, so take you through a process. So number one, I work for the African Development Bank. I'm the principal regional officer in charge of climate investment programs across 13 countries in East Africa. I'm based here in Kenya, and I'm pleased to tell you that the value of the work that we do on the ground is looking into supporting the dreams and goals of an individual to a whole country as well. And that comes with a lot of experience, and I'll be happy to be sharing from some of the work that we're doing. Secondly, I am a director with Profectus Capital Group. Profectus Capital Group is is a boutique investment firm that provides both financial services and non-financial services, basically business advisory services to SMEs in Kenya. And obviously the East Africa, by extension, across the continent as well. And that is very unique because we have a lot of SMEs, a lot of entrepreneurs coming to us, and we capture a lot of their stories, and some of these stories I'll be sharing, but also from my own personal experience as well. Thirdly, I sit as a mentor on the Tony Elumelu Foundation African Entrepreneurship Program, and I've been fortunate to mentor a number of entrepreneurs across Africa. I also like teaching. I really like teaching. So I'm a guest lecturer at Strathmore University in Kenya, African Leadership University in Rwanda, and now sometimes University of Guelph in Canada. Lastly, I want to say I'm an angel investor. So I like people with brilliant ideas, and I'm able to take the risk of putting some resources into them, but also some mentoring as well. And the conversation today has been between the partnership between Mindosphere Institute, a leadership platform that I lead on, and together with Influence 21. Thank you for having me. I'm very much looking forward to a good conversation today.
Thank you, Funso. And you've just talked about Mindosphere, which is something I really admire. I think you're doing fantastic things with Mindosphere. You are inspiring the next generation, and not just the next generation, even the current generation. Yeah. And I think that is particularly important because we have to do our best to make sure that as Africa moves forward, as we have all these aspirations to, develop our economies, we are not forgetting that we have to look back. We have to reach out and get those of us who are not able to get the same knowledge that we have, and create this ecosystem whereby everyone is growing together. And I think that's the essence of Influence 21 as well, which is this project and initiative that the Newmark Group has started. And the idea is to ensure that African enterprises can become very influential during this 21st century. And now that is a good segue into why we are doing this, right?
That's right.
We are doing this on our end to make sure that entrepreneurs become scalable, become resilient, because we know that over half of enterprises in Africa just don't make it beyond the second and third, year.
Absolutely.
Africa is one of the countries or one of the regions where, and let me just go back. To me, Africa is actually a country. People are actually blasted for saying that. But I want to believe that in Africa, for us to actually be very competitive, we need to actually think of Africa as one place where we need to play as entrepreneurs. Yeah. Because think about it. Africa has what, 50-something countries?
54 countries.
54 countries?
Yeah.
Now, each one has what? 50 million people, 70 million people, 10 million. Now, China has 1-point-something billion people. The US, 500 million. They have fantastic economies because they have the numbers, and also because they have big middle classes. So we also have to think in terms of numbers. We have to think beyond our borders. Okay. And that's why I like the fact that I come from Burundi, you come from Nigeria, we are in Kenya, nice. And we're having this conversation. Yeah. And for me, that's symbolic in itself. That's true. Because in Africa, we know that entrepreneurship is admired. However, why is it that over half of our businesses just don't make it, even beyond the second year? So I just wanted to segue into that and ask you, even before we go any further, what is your definition of entrepreneurship?
Thank you. And before I answer that question, I also want to just re-emphasize the notion that we are part of something big, a continent that is crying for development. And I've had the privilege to travel to 42 out of these 54 countries in Africa. And I can tell you that entrepreneurship is something that is applicable everywhere. It's possible everywhere. And the truth about it is that if we're ever going to get out of the situation, the crisis that we're in, entrepreneurship offers us the fastest route out of it. And we're going to come into that conversation. But then, even though we are quite aware of the significance of entrepreneurship in transforming individual lives, a family, a community, a country, and a continent, why is it that we're still failing in it? And I think that's the conversation we wanted to have today. And the conversation about the mistakes that people have made in the past or the failures, it's very important in understanding the way forward. So, and I like what you said. In life, as you live life forward, you can only understand it backward. And in understanding life backward, you must pause and look back and ask questions. Why are certain things not working in Africa? And so let me come to the definition of entrepreneurship. Now, and it's a very tricky one, and I'm not going to, and again, let me put this out there. We're not monopolists of the knowledge on entrepreneurship. We've been learning ourselves, we're sharing, and I think there's going to be an opportunity for everyone connected to be part of this conversation. Now, Gilbert, let me explain this with a story. And I'm hoping that the message will be very clear. Think of two friends, two boys, young boys who went to the market. Each one of them got one orange fruit. And let's say each one of them bought the orange fruit for $2 or 2 shillings. And then they went their ways, they went home. The first one, on getting home, met his neighbor. And the neighbor said, hey, listen, I like the orange fruit that you have. Can I buy it from you? And the guy says, yes. How much do you want to sell it? And he says, I'll sell it for 3 shillings. Remember, he bought it for 2 shillings. He's selling it for 3 shillings. Now, and for him, he's really happy. He has made a profit, and if you put that in percentage, 50% return. Think of the second guy who went home as well and met his neighbor, and the neighbor said, I like what you have. Can you sell it to me? And the guy said, hold on, give me 30 minutes. And the guy goes into his house and cuts the orange fruit. He squeezes the juice, and he gets a plastic cup with a straw, and he brings out an orange juice to the guy. And he said, I'm going to sell it to you for $7 or 7 shillings or even 5. The difference between two of them, they both started from the same point. They had the same asset, but one was happy to sell and make a profit. And I will call that person a businessman. The other thought of, it is not enough to just give it to you. Can I do a bit of value addition? Can I convert it from a fruit to juice, package it well, and have it ready for you? So that I save you the stress of doing that yourself. And I'll call the other one an entrepreneur. Now, we may not agree about what it is, but we should be very clear about what it is not. And I think that's where I want to start from today. And let me say this. The first person didn't do anything necessarily wrong. And we must understand that there are places for business people. What we have in Africa is a lot of us are doing businesses. As businessmen and businesswomen, very few of us are doing entrepreneurship. And you can scale this down to an individual who bought an orange to extrapolate it to a country that has a crude oil and is selling it the way as crude oil and then buying refined products. And you can scale it down to a country that has cocoa tree and sell the cocoa beans. And then later on, another country buys it, transforms it into chocolate, and the value addition is higher. So, and these are the conversation about entrepreneurship, and we must be able to see it from an individual person to the decisions that we make, the mindset behind it, the belief system behind it, as well as the approach to it. And we extrapolate that to a continent. Because think of it, we are all an aggregate of individuals. So what makes a country is not necessarily the jurisdiction, the geography, there's the people as well. And this is the place of entrepreneurship, that we must be able to see opportunities to add value to whatever product, whatever service, or whatever opportunity, or whatever asset that we have.
Wow, that's fantastic. And you've said value, adding value.
Absolutely.
I like that word. But before I continue, I just want to ask all our participants to put in the chat section what you think about what he has just said. In all our countries, we have these people who tend to be brokers, the business people. They're not necessarily entrepreneurs. They are just looking for a quick buck. In every language, there's a concept, there's a name for it. I would be very interested to know what they are called in your language. I know that, for example, in Burundi, we have a term called abadirimen. All the Burundians, please type something there. Basically, that means someone who's just in it for a quick deal.
Yes.
And let me just pick up on that when you talk about value. The first time I heard about entrepreneurship, I didn't even go towards what it actually means today. I just heard the French word entrepreneur because I come from a French-speaking country. And entrepreneur comes from the verb entreprendre, which simply means to undertake. And for me, I immediately extrapolated that to mean when you have to undertake something, you have to have an objective. You have to have something you're aiming at. You won't just start walking towards someplace without any destination.
Right.
So there has to be an element of undertaking something for a goal, for an objective. And that objective cannot just be self-serving. So you have to think about maybe other people for whom you are adding value, and therefore they are appreciating you in return. So however way we look at it, we seem to be coming back to the concept of adding value. And in economics, you will hear the word value addition, which is very critical for economies.
Yes.
You've talked about crude oil, for example. The lack of value addition to these raw materials is actually a problem for us. But the fact that other countries or other companies are adding value is actually making them extremely wealthy and extremely rich. So I like the fact that we are coming down to this concept of adding value. And adding value can take many shapes and forms. It can be done in many different ways. And it's for you and for us and for every single entrepreneur to be very deliberate about what kind of value they want to add. It cannot be left to chance. So when you get that orange, decide, am I going to squeeze it into a cup, a plastic cup, and then offer a full package that looks nice with a straw, or do I just want to sell the orange? And we are saying there is nothing wrong with either, but perhaps there is one of these two people who is going to get rich or more successful quicker than the other.
I agree.
So we can park that.
And let me jump in there. I need to put us to understand. Think of the person that's selling the orange juice that we consider to be an entrepreneur.
Yes.
He's getting a plastic cup. The plastic cup is made from a factory that is going to require labor and ultimately create employment. He's also getting a straw. So by the time he's converting the oranges to orange fruit to oranges, he's been able to create opportunity, market for two businesses in between. And that is the multiplier effect that we're talking about, that at the end of the day, we don't judge entrepreneurship purely on the basis of how much money are they making. It is about how much value are they contributing. And that value could be in employment. It could be in market expansion. Because now, by buying the cup, that's an additional customer to the factory somewhere else that's producing the cup. That's an additional customer to the factory somewhere else that's producing the straw. And that is how we must multiply economic opportunities for ourselves. And so when I think of myself as an entrepreneur, it may be incorrect to think of how much money I'm making, but rather I must see myself as a part of the society. We're growing something together.
Now, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
You've just said something very interesting. You've just said that it's beyond the money.
Beyond the money.
Do you feel like there are a certain number of things that we need to learn correctly? I've met a number of entrepreneurs or even aspiring entrepreneurs. And when I ask them, why do you want to be an entrepreneur? They say, oh, well, I saw this guy, he drives a nice car. Oh, I saw this lady, she drives a nice car. She lives in a nice house. You know, she has all these material, success factors, and I want that. Do you feel like perhaps we need to take a step back as entrepreneurs from that particular criteria that leads us to want to become entrepreneurs? Or do you think that that's fine? Perhaps we should just, keep that. It might work for most people. But I have my own point of view, but I'm very curious to hear what you have to say, because indeed, money is a major motivating factor.
Agreed.
But we also know that it doesn't necessarily carry the day, because at the end of the day, over half of companies fail. What do you think?
And this is quite an interesting question, because you cannot discount the place of money and the value of it in driving motivation, in incentivizing commitment and focus. But it's also very important to understand what is the original mindset of the entrepreneur. So, Gilbert, let me put this straight. The entrepreneur in the entrepreneurship is the most important ideology, is the most important focus. So oftentimes Saturdays when I'm not doing my normal jobs, when I meet young, techie guys, innovators who are saying, I have a business idea, Funso, I want you to invest in my business. The first thing I want to do is spend first 5, 10, 20 minutes. I'm like, tell me who you are. Tell me, how did you get into this? Tell me your background. Because this thing is about the person, and to a large extent, their belief system, their mindset about the motivation for going into it would really much determine how long they want to stay in it. Because for some people, if it is for quick money, the moment they make the money, they cannot see beyond that.
Yeah.
For some people, if it's about profitability, they are focused about profitability, they don't see sustainability. For some people, it's about gain. Gain is short-term, they don't see long-term benefits. And it's very important to talk to understand the mindset of the entrepreneur in the entrepreneurship discussion. And I think the conversation today, it's about that. So when I think of the mistakes that have been made in the past, most of these mistakes, they always border around the person. Have you also noticed that in most businesses in Africa, the moment the owner dies, the business dies? Or the moment the owner is just, it might not even be dead. It might just be, in a way, not have the ability to continue the level of energy that he had when he started. The business dies, because you always see the businesses revolve around the person. But it takes a lot of effort to transform from a mindset of an individual who is driven about gain, short-term returns, to a mindset of a person who thinks of himself as a corporate entity, who is building something for the longer term and who is trying to think of generation. Ask yourself, how many businesses do we have owned by Africa right now that is currently managed by people in the third generation?
Very few.
Very few.
Very few.
Very, very few. And when you meet a lot of Israelis, I've been reading a lot about Jewish people, even a lot about Indians, you realize the businesses that are being led by people in the 7th generation. And so it's important to really emphasize who is the entrepreneur, what is the motivation behind the person's interest in that entrepreneurship. And I think from there, we are able to understand what kind of appropriation, what kind of support, and what kind of innovation do we bring in there.
I want to unpack something.
Please.
You've said so many fantastic things. And by the way, guys, please be involved in this conversation. We want to hear what you think. And we want this conversation to be extremely personal. We are not preaching to the whole world. We are preaching to you as an individual in your own context. What would you like to share with us in terms of what he's just said, for example, your identity? How do you feel your identity and your context limiting you or facilitating your own understanding of what entrepreneurship is, whether it motivates you, whether it demotivates you? Please share with all of us some of your insights. But I just want to pick up on some of the things Funso said. Growing up in Africa, we grew up in education systems that were built in the 60s.
True.
Reformed here and there, but by and large, these are education systems that are optimized to create employees in specific technical fields. And when I talk about employees, I'm not really denigrating anything. I'm just saying that you can be a fantastic employee and be an entrepreneur an entrepreneur at the same time
That's
within the company or even in your own ventures.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to put it out there. But we have education systems that are not necessarily equipping us to become entrepreneurs. That is, people who are adding value to other people's lives, or people who are creating values for other people to compensate them for that value. And that becomes a big challenge because there is a strong scientific basis for creating a company. Companies and businesses and enterprises are not things you just wake up one day and say, I'll do this. There are rules that govern the process of becoming a successful entrepreneur. There are different scientific and technical things you need to know. Just the same way you need to be a doctor, there are certain things you need to know. So let's just try to unpack some of these elements. And I would like to rank them maybe in 3 different categories. The first category is that of belief systems. The second one would be the goal setting mechanism. The third one is how we come up with our strategies. Let's unpack the belief system aspect of it. You've already mentioned something about this. When I started my business, I started business when I was very young, when I was about 16 years old. Wow. And I was in high school, and there was this school I went to, and they were very liberal and very flexible about accepting ideas from students. And I teamed up with a few other fellow students, and we started this shop. And very quickly, it picked up. And we didn't start this shop to make money, because at the time we really didn't need to make money per se. But we were just doing something that will generate some income that can help some of us do certain activities. And very quickly, I realized that, hey, this is not as easy as I thought. I thought you just go, get things, you sell them. But I started noticing some strange things. I noticed that, for example, candy has 100% profit margin. That is, if I buy it at 5, I sell it at 10. However, soft drinks would probably give me 10% return. I found that extremely fascinating. So I started observing all the different products and how they behave and how they contribute to generating this income. And then I started discovering other things. I started discovering that companies that made these goods were also part of a whole ecosystem. They were buying things to make what they were selling to us. And in the end, I decided that I'm going to dig deep into this thing called entrepreneurship. And by the time I was done with high school, maybe 3 years later, I pretty much had decided that this is going to be part of my life. Why do I say this? I say this because there is a learning curve.
That's true.
If I had not done that small business, I would never have learned about the world of entrepreneurship. The mindset I just wouldn't have never gotten it. But that wasn't enough. Just being aware wasn't enough. I had to go and read some books. I read economics books. I started reading books like the famous Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it took a long time for me to have the right frame of mind, for me to have the right grasp of what this thing is truly. And one of the things I learned was, number one, it has a life of its own. Gilbert and the enterprise are 2 different things. My fears, my problems need to be separated from this other thing that I'm creating. And I'm noticing that many entrepreneurs become very entangled. Allow me to use that word. Emotionally, yes. Emotionally entangled. And they become too emotional. And they become too emotionally attached to what they're doing. So when something goes wrong, when something doesn't go their way, they are affected in such a way that it actually affects their ability to continue successfully in that business. So that's one of the big belief system problems I've seen. I've suffered it myself. Yeah. But I just want to check with you whether you agree with that assertion, and whether there are other belief system problems that you see in our African context that are hampering people from actually putting up very robust and resilient businesses that can go beyond them.
Thank you. I want to congratulate you. You started at 16 And I think I started way after you, of course. But it's very good to, when we become, as we grow older as well, and we want to see change, it's also important that we encourage people to start early. That learning curve comes with almost what I call a failure curve. And they go hand in hand. You learn more from failure than you learn from success. And so if you're going to learn at all, you learn along the curve of your failure. And it's very important that we say this: as you fail forward. The failure itself is not a problem. And I think, let me tell you, the cultural or the economic mentality or belief system in Africa is that the society is very hostile at you when you fail. And I always use a story. Think of a child, 1-year-old child, that is taking baby steps to work. They take the first step, they fall down, but you clap for them for making that effort because you want them to try again. They fall down again after 2 steps. You keep clapping for them. You don't say, "Ooh, look at you, you're just eating the food," and all that. You encourage them. And I wish we could take that to a higher level where we don't, demonize. I mean, we don't punish failure by making them look like they are failure. You see, it's one thing to fail, it's another thing to be a failure. And they are two different things. So many of us have failed, but we're not failure. I don't know if that makes sense to you. But, the fact that I failed does not make me a failure. And my failing was an opportunity for me to learn and get better. And I'll give you a quick story. So I remember it was in the university, and I hope some of my colleagues are here are connected. So university, I studied my bachelor's in Nigeria, and you can be rest assured that in your bachelor period, when you study in the late 90s, you are definitely going to have strike, And then we had this crazy long one. And I decided not to go home because normally school would be shut down. I decided to stay, and I wanted to do agriculture. So I partnered with one of my friends then, his name is Toby. And we got a massive piece of land from the university, free of charge. We didn't pay for it. And then luckily I had won a federal government scholarship. So I was used it as seed capital into it. Young boys, 2 of us, we were doing 8 hectares of maize plantation. It was so huge. We were using mechanized system, farming, using tractors. We got a lot of laborers and all that. Let me tell you, oh dear, the way we failed, I think we had to just take solace in the fact that we tried something. And why did we fail? And I think so the failure wasn't a failure that the crop didn't grow or we didn't get the science right. The failure was the fact that we thought business was driven by passion. And I'm going to be honest with you. Passion alone is not enough. And when you talk about that emotional entanglement, it's very much driven around, this is my baby. You don't know the number of hours that I put into this. And they cannot separate. It's a kind of mother and child relationship that they cannot separate themselves from the business to have this ability to step out and have an helicopter view and be able to see what is going wrong or what needs to be done right. We were too passionate about the business. And what that made us do, we spent too much money too fast, too early on. And at the end of the day, the return was not good enough. The second thing was, and I want to correct this, a lot of people who are emotionally connected to the business, they mistake busyness for productivity. Like being busy around your business does not necessarily mean you're being productive. It takes a very solid analytical mindset to be able to step out of it and look at your business and be able to say, am I being efficient? But you have to be more logical at that point than more emotional. So it's about logic, emotion, interaction. There are times that you need your emotion to drive things, to propel things, but you also need to be a lot more logical to be able to look at your business, to ask yourself, am I doing the right thing? And the ability to raise those questions to yourself will really help a long way.
Wow, that's fantastic. And I think you've answered Nicole Mora's question. She had asked whether we have any advice for those who are solely driven by passion. And when you were talking, I just remembered something I learned early on from Robert Kiyosaki. I'm sure many people actually have read his book,
Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yeah.
I agree and I disagree on some of his philosophies, but a few of them really enlightened me on this particular question. And one of the things I learned was there are different income quadrants. When you're looking at money, you can look at it from different categories of sources of income. Yeah. The first category is what he called employment.
Absolutely.
And many of us are in employment, and that is a perfect way to start one's journey, and it's a perfect thing to do. It's very honorable. And then he would advocate for taking some of the income from employment and divesting it into a business. It could be a startup, and then from there graduate it into a large company or a large business.
That's right.
And from there migrate it into other types of investments. It could be real estate, it could be paper investments that are a bit more risky and so forth. So without necessarily being prescriptive of any specific method, I would simply like to add that you need to learn what your philosophy is in regards to how you want to grow in this journey. I knew very, very early after reading all this information that I want to start with some kind of say consultancy or employment income, and then take an amount of that, put it into a vehicle. Could be a company that I create. Incidentally, in Africa, that's actually one of the easiest approaches. It's the hardest from a personal investment point of view, because here you have this activity that you have, which is your primary source of income, and here you have another source of income. Now, when you bring in the question of passion, for me, there was no passion question, because I said, no, this is a purely logical process. I'm looking for a vehicle. Now, when it comes to looking for that vehicle, there are certain questions. There is a certain learning process that I had to go through. I had to ask myself, okay, what are my skills? What are my gifts? What are the things that I'm particularly good at that I can do at the same time as I do this other activity? Right. If I had gone into farming, it wouldn't have worked, because it's way too far from what I was already doing. Right. So I think that there is that logical process that needs to be adopted by the entrepreneur, because, as you said, self-leadership is the key. The entrepreneur is the most important asset. So having made that decision, it sort of gave me a more focused approach to this. I hear many people asking me, should I quit my job? And I know. Okay. I know you have many insights on this, but I hear this very often. And I often tell people to first take a step back. Look at the philosophy that you want to implement in your life. If you are happy to go through a very difficult, dangerous process, and you want to invest everything, and like Nicole said, you want to feel the passion, if that is what you are looking for, you can quit. But don't forget about your family and your children and so forth. I mean, that's a whole thing. But if you truly want to build wealth, that's the thing. If you want to build wealth that scales over time, consistently, then have a plan. Sometimes I'm usually asked, what's your vision for your business? I don't always have a grand vision for the next 20 years.
Thank you.
But I do try to have some kind of philosophy of how I'm going to go to the next level. And I think that's the thing that many people don't take enough time to go into. And to some extent, and we've discussed this in private, to some extent, the fact that there is so much information out there cripples people. It cripples us from sitting down and doing the hard work of looking for the right information that we need. I remember reading tons of books just to find an insight about one single thing. And that's a culture that I don't see being spread in the entrepreneurial culture. There is this get the information quickly and move on to the next thing. That academic almost culture of looking for that specific insight about something you need to unlock your potential is not there. If I hadn't done that philosophical research of knowing about Kiyosaki, about the cash flow quadrant, about how the economy works, about the fact that there is demand, there is supply, and about the fact that there are different vehicles that you can use to bring in revenue, I wouldn't have been able as a person to chart an entrepreneurial culture. So I would say that from a belief system point of view, this is to me very fundamental. You have to test your knowledge, you have to question it, you have to create the culture of questioning everything you've known to date. You have to think of yourself as inadequate. You have to think of yourself as a blank canvas. You have never arrived until you are in the grave. And I think some of the entrepreneurs who get early success, and I'm one of them, I got some success early in my career. I kind of didn't have a plan for the success. Now, that's the flip side.
The other part.
I didn't have a plan for the success at that time. So I didn't carry myself in the best way in that particular phase. So my belief system wasn't ready for success. And if I didn't have the right people around me, my co-founder, Raisa, I thank her very much. She's one of the people who has kept me grounded, particularly at the Newmark Group. And I went through a phase where I managed to survive it. But I guarantee you that success today is the biggest problem for tomorrow's success. What do you think?
Deep, very deep. Thank you very much. Listen, I think I'm privileged to have a lot of interactions with young entrepreneurs, either teaching in the class and then they presenting their ideas, the entrepreneurship ideas. I have to say this, I had the privilege to sit on a panel of judges for Alibaba Business School funded Global Entrepreneurship Challenge for Africa, the African finals. And there were amazing, ideas all across the continent. And the more I developed this database in my head about entrepreneurship across the continent, the more I come to creating a pattern of what the challenges are. And I'm going to say this for people listening to us. The natural inclination of most entrepreneurs is to think that when things are not going well, it is because of something external. It's because of the market, it's because of the system, it's because of COVID. And to some extent, that may be the reality. But the truth about it is that it's usually about the entrepreneur, the person, and the ability for you to become an experiment in the laboratory of life. That you yourself, you are an experiment. And I always say this, that you have an ability to be a masterpiece while at the same time still being work in progress. So being a masterpiece, like you are a tech guy, you're really good at what you do. And people recognize that. But behind the scene, you also know that you're still a work in progress. And the combination of that is very important, that I'm most focused on that work that is in progress. And progress is a continuum. We never get to the end of it. So I like what you said, never get to a sense where you think you've arrived or you've made it. You've never made it. If you've conquered one, there are 2 more to conquer. If you've conquered 5, there are 10 more to conquer. So there's always a space for you to grow bigger, to get better. And that is very important because every level will require a new way of thinking. And if you're going to conquer that new level, you have to subject yourself to the ability again and again, where you start with yourself. And I've learned it that the more you're able to do that, the easier it becomes for you to provide the leadership in entrepreneurship that is needed with the people working with you or the people that you're interacting with in the marketplace. So And I think this is very important. And as we emphasize on what we call deadly sins, and maybe I should refer that you, the entrepreneur, may be the deadliest person in the whole equation, because it's very important that you constantly become that work in progress. You're learning new things. You're digging deep and that. And there is an institution of life. I don't know how God does it, such that some of the things that are going to be transformational in your life, information, opportunity, they don't come at your first trial. They require you to keep digging and digging and digging and digging. You may actually be looking for something else and you stumble on them, but there would have been a necessary demand on you to do the digging, and no one is going to do that for you. And I think it's very important that as we expand this entrepreneurship story and narrative in Africa, the person must become our first starting point. You are, I know it's funny that, and unlike French words, that entrepreneurship is just the ship that an entrepreneur is in. So what the business you're doing is you steering a ship. And if this ship is going to crumble, it comes down to the ability of your, leadership. If it's going to become a Titanic, it comes down to that, because you're steering a ship and you're moving it from one point to another. And I think it's important. So I also want to emphasize the place where, and I think you've said this over and over again, we must learn to embrace failure differently. And I can tell you this, numbers can speak to it. Every entrepreneur in a journey, the reason why more than half of them don't make it to the third anniversary is because within the first 3 years, you're going to go through what we call the value of debt. That value of debt for an entrepreneur, it could be you run out of cash, cash flow crisis. It could be that at the same time, all your customers are not paying, and yet you have your obligations that you have to meet. It could also be that something significant changed. It could be regulation. It could be in the market that had an impact that you're going to go through a bit of a dip. And the reason why a lot of people don't come out is largely because the way they are embracing that challenge, that setback, that bend, is oftentimes where the problem is. You are going to go through that dip. The value of everyone went through it. Everyone will go through it. But the problem is, or the question is, how do you navigate your way out of that complexity?
And you might go into it more than once.
Absolutely.
I know we've gone through it severally. I can even tell you the dates.
And thanks to COVID, 80% of all of us.
Well, interestingly for us, it's been COVID was not the biggest problem. Actually, I wouldn't say that it's been a challenge for us.
Nice.
But I would say that in 2012, the first one hit. You've gone through 2 years of doing a lot of business, doing a lot of busyness.
Yes.
Doing a lot of activities, just like any startup company does, testing different things. But then we got to a place where you just run out of money, you run out of energy, you become demoralized. And then you decide to give yourself, I remember at the time we decided to give ourselves just a couple of more months, just take it a day at a time. And when you have a strong belief system, particularly for me as a Christian who believes in God's will for my life, and I knew that this was something that He wanted me to do. And I'm not imposing this on anyone, but this is definitely my where I stand. We came out of it and just took off. And then another one hit later when something you mentioned happened, when very large clients who owed us big chunks of money just were not paying. They were delaying. And in the meantime, you have bills due, you have salaries due, you have all these things that have to be paid. And you're just doing your best not to, not to close shop.
Stay afloat.
And you see your phone ringing every day. You're like, do I pick this one? I don't pick this one. But guess what? The belief system carried the day. The courage to believe in your journey, again, came through. And I think I want our viewers to get a sense of the key theme of this session today. The key theme is mindset, belief system. Because
of the
entrepreneur,
yeah.
Exactly, of the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So we are going to have 2 other episodes that will dive much more deeply into more technical things, like how do you set up your finances as an entrepreneur? How do you approach that whole bit? How do you approach brand building? That's something that we'll focus on as well in more technical terms. But for today, we just wanted to make sure that we are setting the right conversation, that we are starting with the right foundations. We are definitely not 100% experts. We know everything. No, what we are saying is we have a journey that we want to share. And this is a journey that has seen successes and failures. And out of those successes and failures, we believe there is a template that other aspiring entrepreneurs or even established entrepreneurs may pick a few tips, recommendations, insights that they can use in their business. And I just want to go to a few of the questions that we have gotten from you. Marvin Kimani, you specifically want to know what systems or what mindset one can adopt to become a fantastic employee and an entrepreneur outside your employment, yet not conflict the two. I can give a very quick insight, but right after my brother here, Funso, because I think that's something you
yes, I can relate to that as a full-time employee of a development bank. And I think it's very important to be very honest. So first and foremost, you have to check within your organization, what are the rules and what is possible. So for my organization, I cannot be involved in anything that is considered to be conflicting with the mandate of my employer. So I cannot be a competitor. You cannot be working for Coca-Cola and be running a side business where you're supplying Pepsi, okay, materials.
Yes.
So that's fundamentally conflicting. And I think for me as well, there's a place of full disclosure where certain things within the norms of the ethics of the company are followed. But I mean, so I imagine, Marvin, that's not a problem. You see, because your job requires your full-time, and basically that's what your salary is about, and there's problems you solved, then how do you build a business on your side that is also going to require your time, an investment of your time and your resources? And I think that's where it requires a lot of pre-establishment thinking. Let me share a personal experience with you. Before, I joined the group that started Perfectus Capital. Before it was started, on a personal level, in 1 year, I had an interview with 11 different CEOs in Kenya. Took them out because I wasn't just interested in building a business that was just like the normal things most people were doing. I wanted to be part of something that had an innovation, something extra that had to define our unique identity. And I think by picking the brain of all of these guys, I'm talking about CEOs of commercial banks and also CEOs of private equity and other entities as well. And it was very important to understand the landscape, but also to understand the direction people were not taking. And that became our initial niche and our entry point into it. The second thing is, it's also very important to build a business with people who have the same mindset like yourself, the drive, the energy, particularly if they are going to run it full time. And I'll be honest with you, the best thing that I have done as a director of Perfectus is the people I've hired. Because to a large extent, I think it's been very easy to empty my brain, my ideas into them, and they have been the carrier of the vision on a day-to-day basis, so that I'm not involved on a day-to-day basis, but I have created systems and they can run on its own and with people that you trust, and you create an incentive for them to continue to give their best to the company. And I think it's very important. Again, let me come to this before you touch it, and I don't want us to forget the question about, should I quit my job? And I get this all the time. I beg you in the name of God, entrepreneurship it doesn't have to lead you into
career suicide.
a suicide state. You know, it doesn't have to. Let's assume that while everyone has the capacity and the innate ability to be an entrepreneur, not all of us could be entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And it's important to be clear that if it's not for you, it is just not for you. Mm-hmm. And the reason for this is you need an anchor period to manage that crisis that's going to happen to you in the first 2 3 years. And sometimes, I'll be honest with you, there'll be times where I've had to personally use my money to bail out the company. And if this money was not there, if this was not there, I don't think we would have survived. Mm-hmm. And again, the initial capital. So again, people come and say, I have a nice idea, I need loan. And I say, if it's a nice idea, you should never start a business with a loan. Start it with your own savings. Mm-hmm. You show me your skin in the game. Find people like you who say, I believe in you, I'm going to have an equity in it as an angel investor. It is wrong. And I'll say this and say this and say this again. It is not correct to take off as a startup with debt. A scale up is possible with debt, but as a startup with debt, it's really wrong. So the best thing is there's a place for organic growth. So make a savings about 2 3 years. And you know where you're going. And this is where it ties into that philosophy of where you're going. You know, I know where I'm going in the next 5 years. I know where I'm going in the next 10 years. And so there's a journey ahead of that. So that it's not a journey you're stumbling into. It's a journey that you are prepared for. And I'll tell you this, in the journey of life, there is no substitute for preparation. You don't just stumble into it. You know, your neighbor is doing it. He's selling water. He's making a killer. Now he's buying a Mercedes Benz. You think that is the next thing to do? No. You may not be aware of the preparatory, experience that makes it possible for him to succeed in that business. Yes. And you just look at the success, you just stumble into it, and you may run into a big crisis. So too many things, I'm just trying to tie them together.
That's perfect.
But it's important to understand that it is possible, but it's possible on a very, organic growth path. You grow small.
Yes.
And let me say this to our new generation. This thing of microwave generation, I want it fast. Entrepreneurship is about process. It takes time.
Yeah.
You may quickly start making money after 6 months, but trust me, that is not the future.
But Zuckerberg was a billionaire at, what, 23? I want that.
Yeah, so the story of Zuckerberg are the stories that we hear. But
it's not forever.
There is also Warren Buffett.
Yes.
Who started at 53.
True.
Who became a billionaire at 70 something, so stuff like that. So it's important to understand that. I strongly believe. So when these young people come and say, I want you to finance the business, I want to see the space of organic growth.
Yeah.
That organic growth is very important for you to learn, fail, and easy to get up.
Yes.
When you are here, when you fall here, the impact is higher than when you fall here.
Yeah.
So fall here, develop the stability over time.
Yeah.
So that when you get here, you don't fall. And I think it's very important.
You've just reminded me, as you were talking, I just remembered many aspects of my journey. And at some point, and this might actually answer in some way this question. There are 3 things that I came to discover really influence the success of an early company or of any company, or of any enterprise. There is time, there is money, and there is technical knowledge or skill. So many of us start with some knowledge of what we want to do. So for example, how to make cakes, but you're employed somewhere. You may have some money from your salary to start a business, but you may not have the time because you're employed, and therefore you will not have the time, at least during the day. So either you create the time outside the confines of your employment. So maybe you get home, you push yourself for another 4 or 5 hours, and then you invest in that cake business. Or you buy the time of another person.
Yes.
Through partnership, maybe a co-founder. Yeah. And they come in and they give the time but they also need to have the technical ability. So it might actually be difficult to find someone with the time and the technical ability because they could also be employed somewhere. So you might have to now get someone who probably doesn't have the same technical abilities, but they have the time. And then you become the person that gives them at least the minimum that they need for you to get started. So it's a bit of a complex situation, because I remember when we started with the Newmark Group in the current form in which it is, because also we iterated over time. What we started doing is not necessarily what we are doing now. I remember that I didn't have the time, and I didn't have around me the co-founders who have all the technical skills. So what I would do is I would try to learn the skills and then work with people, young people or friends who could actually come in and do some of the things that I was learning, and then telling them, hey, this is how you can do it. Maybe you can learn more online or such things. So you have to be able to look at those three things constantly as you go along. So when it comes to quitting your job, you have to ask yourself, okay, I quit this job, but the money, the cash flow goes. So what is my solution for this? Do I have an investor? Now, someone investing in you, they will not invest in you unless if you're showing that their investment is going to be profitable. So
Absolutely.
investment tends to follow success, unfortunately. Investment doesn't necessarily follow dreams. So I think that to answer that question, it's important to look at these three things at all stages as you go along. And I see we have a few more questions.
Let me say some of those questions.
Yes.
I want to suggest that you attend the next classes, because questions, Rogers is saying the challenge in business, in competition, is how do you deal with competition, especially in small businesses. And we're going to talk about the systems, around the business, beyond the person, and that. So I encourage you to attend the next class. There's also what's the best strategy on pricing for a new business. This is almost a whole discussion on its own.
Yeah.
Pricing, and it's really hard because sometimes the traditional method of doing that, they're not very much consistent with the present realities. But Gilbert, the point you raised is very interesting, because so to also add to Marvin's question, you must also ask yourself, oftentimes in life, when you have money, you don't have time. And when you have time, you don't have money. When we were younger, we had a lot of time. We didn't have money.
Oh, yeah.
And then you grew older, you had some bit of money, but now time is, yeah. So you should also ask yourself, what do I bring? If you're having employment, most likely the savings from the employment gives you a capital base. Yes. You have money, and then you don't have the time to do it. And then, like what you said, you can actually have that money in exchange for the time of another person through a partnership that is very much bounded together in common belief, common mindset, common goal, and then also common strategy.
Yes.
It's very, very important to be careful who you go into business with.
There is something I want to add to that. You have to be very careful indeed. And you also have to look at that question. It's interesting, that question comes so often. And it's important to look at that question from the perspective of the journey of your life. You've just said that sometimes you actually don't have the time, but you might have the knowledge. Or you might even have the time, but you don't have the knowledge. How about the situation whereby, like Marvin, maybe you are employed, and you just don't feel like you have enough money to get you to start the right business? The reality is you don't have to start the business now. You can actually give yourself some room and maybe say, over the next 2 years, I'm going to do everything I can to get to this salary level. I'm going to look at the progression and career progression culture in my industry, or look at my employer and say, okay, I'm going to invest in my studies, get an MBA, be very good at what I do, be promoted. This way I'll have room, financial room, to actually do what I want to do in terms of business.
Yeah.
So I think being employed is a very good starting point.
Absolutely.
It's a fantastic starting point.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, many people in Africa don't have that luxury of actually wanting to start a business when they already have another source of income.
Yeah.
It tends to be something that they default to because they have nothing else to do. But I think that it makes sense to think like, is it Marvin? Marvin, and start thinking about how can I go about this.
Okay.
We don't seem to have a lot of time left because we have done almost 1 hour and a half. However, maybe we can pick up on a couple of the questions. So there is a question on the challenge in, the challenge in business is competition. How do you deal with competition, especially in small business? Now, we don't have to try to answer this whole question, but we can look at it from a mindset point of view, in a definition point of view. We'll look at the technical aspects later, but we can look at it from that point of view. Netflix founder and CEO said once that the biggest competitor to Netflix, which is a video content streaming platform, is sleep. So,
oh wow, that's deep.
Think about it. I mean, if you fall asleep, you are not going to watch the movie. And for me, that sparked, a light bulb, because we sometimes think that competitors are the ones who are either selling the same things as us or such things. Your competitor can be your client's mindset. Your competitor can be something completely unrelated to your business. Your competitor can be your own reputation. If you don't have a strong enough reputation and people in your field value reputation, you could actually be having a problem for no other reason, but simply that issue. So from a mindset point of view, I would like to tell Rogers that you need to really start from a place of expanding your horizon and your lens when it comes to competition. Absolutely. In your field. Absolutely. It doesn't have to be a competing product. It doesn't have to be a competitor. Now, those ones are very important, and there are techniques and tricks that we look at in upcoming sessions, whereby you look, for example, at brand positioning and brand differentiation. For example, do you have a brand promise that you can specifically position to your clients? Because competition, again, suggests the issue of either pricing or what people think of what you're doing. So if you're having a problem with your competition and they are beating you, don't necessarily just look at pricing. Also look at how people view and see you. And we'll look at specific techniques that you can use to build a very powerful brand. And that brand might not just be just the company. It could also be things like your own personal brand, how your employees behave, how they speak, how they think. So that question is very important, especially when you broaden the scope of what we mean by competition. I don't know if you have some insights.
Thank you. And I like the fact that we keeping these answers to the mindset, level. And I think which ultimately drives everything. What I've also learned is what many people call competition is actually really not competition, to be honest. When I was younger, we have a proverb in my local language. Basically, it says, the sky is big enough such that two birds can fly without their clashing. That there's a space and that for everybody to thrive up there. And obviously, you might say some products or some services that follow a pyramid style. And as you get on top, the space is very limited. What I think is important is to first ask yourself, must I be constrained to a particular space, or do I have the ability to bring in new spaces? Do you understand? Can I bring in new spaces into the game completely, to the point that I have a first mover advantage and every other person is catching up? And that takes a lot of critical thinking, a lot of deep diving in understanding yourself, understanding your business, to be able to say, no, I don't have to do all the business in Nairobi alone. Who says somebody, forgive us for those of you who are not in Kenya, who says somebody in Nyeri cannot afford the same? Who says someone in Kisumu doesn't have the same purchasing power as someone in Mombasa. Do you understand that? When we now think this is only for this place, it cannot be outside that. So I think that's very important on that mindset level. I'm going to say another point, and my final point, and I think it may sound controversial, but I know, and probably once you keep thinking about it, it makes sense to you. Whatever you call competition is at the same level of your ignorance. I'm going to let that sink for a second. Whatever you call competition is at the same level of either your ignorance or your lack of what I call first move knowledge. And it's just that. Because the moment you're able to exercise mastery and advanced knowledge above your competitors or comparators or in the space, it's not competition anymore. So your competition is almost at the same level of probably what you don't know. And the moment you can engineer new knowledge, and basically this is what innovation is about, the moment you can quickly think and be able to be ahead of the game. So when you're not ahead of the game, you're within the game or behind the game, that's where you often complain about competition. I'm not trying to downplay competition. I think it's there, but you must also see it. The same competition that you may perceive as a challenge to someone else is an opportunity. It just comes down to mindset. To someone else, it's an opportunity because that tells me it's time to move up. You know, if we're already using the same technology and we're all competing for the same customer, what if I can have a higher technology? I don't know if it makes sense to you.
Exactly.
And that is what I think is that mindset, the power of it to see it that way is very important. Obviously, that's going to translate down into how do you mechanize your operational systems in, you know, to move in that direction where you're able to beat competition.
Wow, fantastic. So we have, I've definitely gained from this conversation, and I hope you have too. If you have any specific questions, we are definitely happy to take them on. Please drop them in the chat box. We are going to be sending an email with a link to this video. We are going to be sharing with you a quick newsletter that has some of the key insights from this conversation. But as we said, this is actually a series, and today we were focusing on mindset because we just wanted to make sure that we are speaking the same language.
Right.
We see some of these concepts the same way. Next time we want to start diving a bit deeper, we will definitely engage other entrepreneurs. We might have some guest speakers, some surprising maybe, or some secret celebrity speakers. So you absolutely have to stay tuned. We'll be sharing information. We'll be sharing through the same channels the various invitation banners. And in terms of how you can contribute, do please share your own experiences. We are going to try to be a bit more tactical going forward, so we'll come up with much more specific recommendations on some of the aspects. So if you have questions on some pain points, do please send those through, because we'll get some expert insights to give you answers to some of those questions, even as we share our own blueprints and as we bring on board other experts in specific areas to actually share their insights. My parting shot would be, I am absolutely excited about this series, because it's part of what I consider to be my passion point, my passion area, which is really to share whatever I get to learn, because also other people have shared with me. And this is really how we can get to push things forward on this continent. It belongs to all of us, and it behooves us, our generation, to make sure that we share as much as we can.
Absolutely.
And then we hope that we can continue also benefiting from each other as we go along. And perhaps, we'll be able, not even perhaps, I definitely believe by the time we are done, maybe in a few months, we'll be able to reach our mark of 1 million Africans impacted with critical business skills. So,
thank you. Thank you very much. This has been a very exciting conversation. I've really learned a lot from you. Thank you for sharing from your wealth of experience, and as well as your expertise and entrepreneurship as well. And I want to reach out to everyone that stayed. Thank you to all of you. And as I said, we want this conversation to continue. And please, I'm begging and reaching out. We want to hear your stories as well. And if there are certain things here that you thought resonated pretty well with you, please feel free to drop us, on the email, something. If you think even if it's you can't type, just record something. We want to capture these stories as well, as we move forward in this masterclass. And as I said, we're really, so today we are like the resident speakers, but we're really looking forward to, bringing in some other people who can also deepen the analysis, the thinking, as well as sharing their own stories as well. And we will continue to do our best to be very practical, and we want to speak to the challenges and the realities that are very Africa-centric. This is our continent. And what we're doing here, this project is coming from our depth of our commitment to our continent. And we believe every one of us has an opportunity to be part of this paradigm shift. So thank you very much. It's been a great honor sharing this stage with you. And thank you to every one of you that have been very active in the chat room. And thanks to all our friends as well. And thanks to everyone that has been working tirelessly in the engineering team behind the scene. We'll continue to get better. Thank you, and God bless you.
All right, fantastic.
All right.